Playing online and on smart devices. Now on London Scottie Radio, it's podcast time. I'm George Matlock. Welcome. It's great to have you back. London Scottie Radio at your service. And I'm George Matlock, your host today. And we have a very special guest on the line. You'll remember Cath Marchbank. And a very good salute to you. How are you, Cath?
I'm very well, thank you, George.
Great to have you back. Yes, great to have you back definitely. On the show. Go on, say it for me. You can say it for me.
Oh, it's good. It's good to be back.
And it's good to have you back. And I know you've got 9 little reprobate Scotties with you at the moment.
Yes.
So we're doing our best to suppress them while we do this recording, but it's all authentic. It's all good. So as long as you haven't got any any other breeds of dog in there, then we're all right. But
Oh well, I'm sorry. I've sneaked 2 little dachshunds in that were in need. So we're 7 Scotties and 2 dachshunds at the moment.
Now, for those who've joined us and who've never heard this programme before, you won't know this, but Cath Marchbank is the welfare officer of STECS, which is the Scottish Terrier Emergency Care Scheme, which has been going since the mid-1970s. And part of their role is to help rehome Scotties who are either in peril or simply need to be moved because of one reason or another. And very often that means, of course, you're also picking up other dogs as well as Scottish Terriers, because often families have more than one breed of dog, don't they?
They certainly do. Yep. So
and I bet you've taken some large dogs, Rottweilers perhaps, in your time?
Odd times we get a bigger dog. One time there was a Labrador and a Dalmatian and a Boxer with the Scotties. So we had 3 big dogs. We took 9 dogs from one household.
Right. Right. So you are very, very busy now. I know that you work pretty much every day. I mean, right? I mean, you are literally 24/7, aren't you, as a service?
Definitely, yeah.
And since we last spoke, which I don't know how to break this to you, but it has been rather a long time.
Since you've been gone.
Well, as you get my drift. So it's been a long time since we last spoke to you. It's got to be a good full year now, hasn't it?
I think it has, yeah.
Yeah. Tell us, if you would, what are the statistics looking like? Because I know that you compile national statistics. You're a national charity. And I know that part of that involves keeping a track of how many Scottish Terriers need to be rehomed each year. I seem to remember in the last few years it was around the 50 dogs a year sort of tag. Where is it at the moment? What's been happening now that we're post-lockdown?
We're getting back up to the 100 mark.
Very busy.
The dogs have really increased. People struggling, losing their houses, struggling to feed the dogs. If it's a short-term thing where somebody needs some help, we can provide the emergency care and we can step in and help towards vet bills or even paying for food. If somebody's really in dire straits. So it's not always about taking the dogs in from the people and rehoming them. We do try to keep the dogs in the home.
Of course.
But sadly, if people have lost the house and they're having to go into rented and it's not a short-term thing, then, it is better for the dogs to be, to come in to be rehomed. Of course.
So what you're saying is that presumably a combination of things is behind this, is it? I mean, it's the economy, the cost of living, which is going up, and presumably more people are having to go back to work, and employers insisting that they do come back to work, because of course a lot of people took on dogs thinking, well, lockdown's here and the labour market has changed and I will now be able to work forever from home. And of course that's not the case, is it?
No, and this is where people are struggling. They all went out, they bought puppies during lockdown. Great when they were working from home with those young dogs, but as you say, they've gone back to work, the dogs are getting bored. Can they afford to pay a dog walker, which is great, somebody to go in, take the dogs out, relieve that boredom. But for a lot of people, they're struggling, the extra bills, the cost of living has gone up so much.
Yep.
So, paying the dog walker, that £20, between £15 and £20 for them to come in and take the dog out, that's one of the things that people are cutting back on, unfortunately, and it's to the detriment of the dog.
If you work 5 days a week, that's £100 down just for the dog walk, isn't it? And that's before anything else. And of course, you've got insurance on top, you've got other things. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to London Scottie Radio, and let's tell you a little bit about what our listeners think of the show. And now that we're back.
This is Jenny. I listen to London Scottie Radio podcasts when walking my lovely Scottie Logan. It's the perfect accompaniment to a leisurely dog walk.
I'm Elaine. I like to listen to London Scottie podcast while chilling with a glass of wine and preparing dinner.
It's Max here. I listen to the podcasts in the bubble bath for fab tips.
This is Zelda. I like to do lino cuts of Scotties. That's what I do when I'm listening to the podcast. I listen to them for inspiration.
This is Fraser, London Scottie Club podcast. It's a great way to end the day.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, listeners, for your little contributions there. So we have Cath Marchbank, Welfare Officer of STECS on London Scottie Radio. And of course, this we don't do this on a regular cyclical basis like we used to, but we have a show called Scottie MOT. Now, there you go. And with Scottie MOT, we like to talk about things to do with the well-being of our lovely treasured pets, Scottish Terriers. Now, as anyone knows, they're lovable dogs, but they can also be vulnerable dogs. They, like any other breed, they need care, love and attention. And as we have been hearing just now from Cath, it's not always easy to get all of those three things magically together, particularly when people have to earn a living, or indeed in some cases where they have lost work because their job is no longer available. And so today we are very much in line with that, thinking that the programme should be devoted to that very, very subject, which is money. Indeed. So we're going to talk today to Cath about ways in which you can save some money. Cath, over to you. I know you've got several tips for our listeners.
Yeah, well, one of the main tips is taking your dogs to be groomed. If you're very good and you start to groom your dogs more yourself, so just by combing them through each day on a daily basis, you're taking all the dead hair out, stopping the coat from getting too thick and bushy. So you might be able to just spread the time of you're taking the dogs to be groomed. So you might get an extra 2 weeks. So instead of going in at an 8 weekly point, you might be able to stretch it to 10 weeks. Just by doing that daily comb through yourself. So hence saving some money throughout the year.
Sounds like very sage advice.
If you're feeling and if you're feeling very brave, to actually have a go at trimming the dogs yourself, there are grooming charts available. It's always good to have a go at grooming after your dog has been recently groomed, because the coat is quite fine. The lines are all in place of where you clip to. So, it is something that can be done, but it's good to seek some practical advice, on how to go about it first. And you have got the expense of buying the clippers. But once you've got that in place, then, you can save yourself quite a lot of money throughout the year.
And you mentioned there, of course, clipping, which of course means involving a sharp instrument. So you've got to be very careful how you use it. First, that you don't injure yourself, but also that you don't injure the coat of the Scottie. But the other way, of course, is hand stripping. And as we all know, that's a very labour-intensive activity. And of course, the costs of hand stripping a dog are quite high. But also I would think that the cost savings are quite high as well. I know somebody who has a terrier, not a Scottie, unfortunately for him, but he has an Irish terrier, which are, of course, lovely dogs as well. And what he tends to do is he hand strips his dog himself. Because he keeps, as you've suggested, you groom the dog, and soon afterwards, what he does is he maintains the coat. So he's literally watching TV. And he's plucking away. And his dog loves it, apparently. And the two of them are watching TV and having a great time. Now, I don't know, some people say to me, you shouldn't hand strip a dog more than 3 or 4 times a year. But I tend to find that my dogs need it after about 6 weeks. They're just back to normal, very bushy.
That's it. But if you can get in there and get that dead undercoat out because remember, Scotties, they don't molt that coat out, so we've either got to strip it out or clip it out. But if you can go in there on a daily basis and comb that coat, it stops it getting that bushy undergrowth, so you're not needing to strip as much. The key thing when you are hand stripping is it's got to be the correct time to do it, because if you're pulling at the hair and it's not ready to come out, then you are hurting the dog's skin, and more than likely the dog's going to come round and give you a good snap and say, "Get off me, Dad, you're hurting." But if the time is right, then once you've got the knack of being able to strip, so some people use a rubber glove, some people use a pumice stone, some will use a stripping knife, whichever technique you've got, and if it's the right time, then it is quite an easy process. So there are chalks and things that you can use that helps, cut the coat down as well.
No, I know that groomers often say, particularly those who are doing the hand stripping, that they will complain if you haven't brushed your dog sufficiently in the weeks leading up to that appointment to see the groomer, because obviously if the dog's fur, particularly the skirt and the underneath, become matted, it's first of all painful for the dog. It has to be untangled. It's not easy for the groomer, because the groomer's now got to add the time to the bill. It all goes on the bill, and very often the dog will snap and be agitated, which doesn't fulfill a very happy experience for either dog or the groomer. So presumably, a very important point which you made at the outset is that it's really important to groom the dog, to brush the coat daily, to get into that routine, and then that will presumably save some of the grooming bills.
Definitely. If a lot of the times if people take a dog into the groomers and it is badly matted, you get your dog back and you say, "Where's my dog?" And they say, "This is your dog. It looks totally different from when it came in." The skirt's gone, because the groomers, they haven't got time to be detangling, to be spraying and combing all those knots out. You can spend 4 or 5 hours doing that on a really bad, a dog with a really bad knotted coat. And that's before you start doing the grooming, just getting those knots out by bathing and combing those knots through, drying the dog, and that's all your grooming session gone. And you've not started to clip.
And you mentioned there sprays. Now, indeed, that's a great bit of a nice lifesaver, isn't it? You can get sprays that you can apply to the fur, and then that helps to presumably loosen and make it easier to brush through.
It does, yes. And also the sprays, if you do use them, it stops debris and dirt building up on the coat. So it's as good to spray the dog once a week, and it just builds up and just helps condition the coat. Right. So they are worth it, but they are, they're not cheap. The good products, they are a little bit expensive, but they do work.
Well, again, if you get into the habit of actually grooming on a daily basis, in the end, you don't even need to use them. So you probably use them to start. If you're, it's like everything else. It's all about getting over the inertia, isn't it? If you've got a dog that's got lots and lots of knots, it's probably a more pleasant and humane way to address the problem is to spray, let it soak in, do it over a week, maybe to allow the condition to build up, brush through, and then, because you managed to brush through, you just carry on brushing. You don't need to keep applying the spray. So that aerosol can probably last for quite a long time, I would think, on that basis.
Yes, it does last a while. And then there's also conditioners that you can detangle, conditioners and detangle shampoos. If you are washing and grooming your dog in between going to the grooming parlour, you can use these products yourself to stop those knots building up in the skirt.
And the sprays that you're talking about, obviously we won't and can't advertise particular brands, but the type of spray, what was it called? Is it literally just called a fur untangle spray?
Yeah, a detangler.
Detangler.
A detangler. So.
Sounds like a soft drink brand, doesn't it? And we said no advertising, not on this show, thanks very much. Okay, a detangler, all right.
Yeah.
It does sound like an effervescent orange drink that you can get in a can. I'm not going to say which one, but it's called Detangler. Ladies and gentlemen, look it up on Google. Gosh. Okay, well, in that case, I think that's a really good money-saving tip. So let's have a look at another topic. So that's grooming. So thank you very much for sharing those practical thoughts there, Cath. I know the next topic you wanted to talk about is food, glorious food, in your own words.
Yeah. It's a hard one with the food, because if your dog is doing well on the food that you're feeding, then I'm a big advocate of why change. But, if money's tight, then to be able to keep your dog, then you've got to look at what can we do to, make it go a little bit further. So one of the things is to actually weigh the food, because a lot of the times we guess, we put our hand into the container where we store the food, if it's a dry food, and we scoop it out. Again, if you're using a spoon if it's a tinned food and you're just, spooning it out of the tin, but we're not actually taking any notice and weighing the food. So sometimes just by taking a few biscuits away, because it is over the grams that we're feeding, if you remove those over the week, you've probably got an extra a meal there. So, long term you are saving money.
It's like all things, don't overfeed. It's good for the health of the dog as well, not to be too obese. And as you say, it's also saving your budget to some degree. And ladies and gentlemen, we are talking here about managing a budget more than actually saving money. I mean, if you can save money, great, but never do this at the detriment of the dog. So always consider the importance of the nutrition that the dog needs in its daily pursuit. I think that's also very important. So don't overdo it. We do not want anorexic dogs. That's not where we're going with Scotties. Scotties would not look nice if they're anorexic.
No, that's it. They've got to look good. They've got to have their.
They've got certain roundedness.
That's it. Yes.
They're short, stubby legs, and they're as cute as they are for that reason. And we must respect that as well. Okay, well, I think that's another really good money managing, at least, if not money saving tip. And then we come to the third topic. Now, this is a topic that I know is very, very difficult at the moment. A lot of people are struggling with this, and that is the cost of insurance. Now, pet insurance is important. Not everybody chooses to have it. Some people prefer to keep their money under the pillow for a rainy day. But yes, insurance does help in the case of huge bills that you weren't expecting, where some very serious operations need to be carried out that could cost into the thousands of pounds. So it's not to be sniffed at, the idea of having pet insurance. But if you are going to have pet insurance, and not everybody, I say, agrees to it or doesn't want to, as the dog gets older, premiums go up anyway. That tends to be a pretty much natural progression. But there are ways in which you can save money on insurance in this inflationary period that we're living, isn't there? There is a way that you've worked out that you can do this, Cath.
Yeah, if you speak to your insurance company, because what you've got to be careful of is jumping ship and changing from one insurance company to another. Because if you do have a pre-existing condition with your dog, maybe your insurance company has paid out, maybe 2 years ago, it's on the dog's record. So if you go to a different company, they're not going to then carry on, or if the problem occurs again, they won't then cover it. So you've got to be very careful if you change companies. So you're as well to stay with the company you're with, but pick up the phone, chat to them, and ask them, is there anything that can be done to reduce your premium? And normally if you play with the excess and pay a bigger excess, then the premium will come down. So that's one thing worth looking at.
So excess, for those who who don't have insurance or don't know quite what it means, it's not me having too many lagers before doing a show. We're not talking about that sort of excess. We're talking here about the amount that you, as the owner of the dog, is willing to pay at the outset of any claim. So if you've got a claim of, let's say it's £500, the vet bills and whatever comes to £500, and let's say you've got an excess of £100 on that insurance policy for that particular insured pet, what it means is that you're basically agreeing to pay that first £100 of the vet bill, and the insurer would then scrutinise the claim with a view to honouring the other £400 to be paid, making a total of £500. I mean, that's what we're talking about, isn't it, by excess?
It is, yes.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. So what you're saying is then that if you choose to, and most insurers are quite flexible like this. In fact, I'm sure that many of them actually quite like the idea of insured actually increasing their excess. If you increase the excess, which means that your willingness to pay on policies, then your premium, your monthly premium could go down.
Yes. Yeah. So, long term, hopefully you're not going to need your insurance, and you're going to save over that year. The trouble is, if you do come to make a claim, and if you have gone for an higher excess, maybe a £250 excess, then you've got to be able to have that £250 handy, when a policy claim comes through.
So it's always wise to have a bit of money for a rainy day, doesn't it, really, Cath?
It is, yeah.
I mean, when you think about the costs involved in insuring even a younger dog, but obviously as the age bracket goes up, so the premiums go up anyway, because they're more vulnerable. Older dogs are considered to be more likely to have a serious matter that needs to be addressed medically, and so therefore there's a greater chance that there will need to be claims made. But when you think about it, if you have a very low excess, and low means different things to different people, but let's say it was £50, you are more likely, as some people would say, to actually claim on a policy like that, because you would just say, well, anything I go for, I can then put on the insurance, and so the insurers have a pretty bad risk, is what they call you. You're a bad risk to them because you keep claiming every time you get over that £50 mark. But if your excess is £130, £150, £200, whatever, you're less likely to want to bring it forward because you know that in any case you're going to have to pay the first part of that. The insurer knows that you're also less likely to, there'll be less propensity, less likely to want to claim unless it's a very serious matter. And I guess really, Cath, the real rub comes in the fact that the costs of veterinary attention are so high now and forever going up that it makes a lot of sense to consider insurance, and it also makes a lot of sense to consider a much higher excess so long as you remember to put money aside to pay that excess, because let's face it, if the insurance bill comes to £5,000, that is a jaw-dropping amount, but actually that's pretty common in many cases for vet bills. What's the difference between an excess of £90 and £250 when you're looking at a bill of £5,000? It's a no-brainer. I mean, I don't mind. I don't mind paying £250, knowing that the next £4,750 is actually going to be paid by the insurer. Meanwhile, I've also saved money because I've saved money in the period in which I wasn't claiming, because my monthly premiums would have been lower, right? And the longer you didn't claim for, the more money you've effectively saved. So I would say the money you've saved in that between those two premiums is the money you should be putting away each month for the rainy day in case you need the excess. So it's a win-win situation, isn't it?
That's it. Because quite rightly, the vet fees have gone up. We were contacted, a dog had just fell off the settee, broke his leg.
Oh dear.
Shattered it in two places. It was a very bad break. £4,500 to fix. Easy,
isn't it? And that's just for falling off a sofa. Think about
that's it,
ladies and gentlemen. Just think about what the dimensions of that, and that's what we're talking about. It's expensive. I mean, I don't know if you've looked at any figures suggesting how much insurance has gone up by, but I presume it's actually gone up in the last couple of years by more than the retail prices index, the indication of UK inflation, because I would have thought that it's gone up by more just because, as you all know, I mean, inflation is an average figure based upon the whole economy, but then specific areas of the economy very often have much higher inflation, and anything to do with medicine, innovation, all these scientific types of things, they tend to rise by more than the average rate of inflation, don't they?
They certainly do. One of the other things that you can do if your pet has come down with a medical issue and it's ongoing and the dog's going to need tablets for life, instead of getting the tablets from the vets, what you can do is ask the vets to provide a prescription.
Yep.
And you can then send off to one of the drug companies which are online, and generally you can buy the tablets for a good 40% less than what the vets charge. Mm-hmm. And so in turn, your insurance company, if you're insured, is still paying that money, but you're not claiming as much. So if you've only got a £12,000 spending that year, you know that the whole £12,000 you're not going to have to be adding to it as the year end coming along, that you're covered. So it's worth, even though the dogs are insured, it is worth still getting a prescription and getting the drugs. Sometimes the human drugs which can be got from the chemist, some of the dogs, the Scotties, if they're having liver problems, some of the drugs that we're treating with are actually human drugs, and I get a prescription from my vet, take it into the chemist, which is just down the road, and I get the medication a lot cheaper.
Do you know what? You've actually reminded me of something very important. One of my dogs has regular medication just for a skin complaint, and I did exactly what you suggested, which is I went to get a private prescription. That's what they're called. You tell your vet that you want a private prescription. They usually charge you around about £15 or thereabouts as an administration fee. At least in London, that's the case. It may vary in other parts of the country, but around the £15 to £20 mark, that's the fee that they will charge you. But for that, they will give you 3 months' supply of medication that, in many cases, as you say, is at least 40% less. And that can really make a big difference, because in the case of this medication, we're probably saving around about £150 every quarter.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm doing that as a savvy consumer. I hadn't thought about what you just said, which is the punchline is that you can still put this on your insurance, because it's still medication which the dog needs. It's just that you're paying less for it. So the insurer should be quite happy as well that you're actually less of a risk again. You're less of a burden to them as the insurer. And as you say, it also allows you to stay within your spending limits, because there are obviously spending limits on how much insurance they will give you. And that's another thing to look into, ladies and gentlemen, is that smaller premiums often mean less cover, or less a lower ceiling in terms of how much you can claim per year from the insurance company. So you need to also look at that. What do you think of comparison websites? Do you think they're a good place to look at for pet insurance?
Yes, it's a good way. If you're starting off from scratch, have a look round. What the key thing you've got to look for is that it will cover the dog for life. So if your dog gets an illness, it is covered for its entire life.
It's a lifetime policy. Yeah.
With some policies, you might only be covered for that £12,000, and once that 12 grand's used up, it doesn't renew the year after, or even it might spread across 2 years. But once that 12,000 is used up, and the dog's got an ongoing issue, you can't get insurance with anybody else. Yep. But the insurance won't then pay out anymore. So it's a lifetime cover that is the key thing.
That's where you shouldn't economise. I agree with you, because your pet comes first, and the whole point of insurance is, yes, you want to avoid nasty financial shocks if your dog is poorly, but you also need to think about what happens if your dog becomes effectively uninsurable in year 3, 4 or 5, because, as you say, the money's run out and nobody else will now insure that dog. So it is a real dilemma, I'm sure, for households, something to really consider. But thank you very much for that. A very good idea on how to save on your insurance premiums for pets. And with that, I think we've come to the end of the show. It's been an absolute thrill. Cath, have you enjoyed yourself?
I have, yes. It's very, very good.
It's great to have you back. We will, from time to time, do the show again. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you probably know, Scottie MOT is a show which used to run on pretty much every 2 weeks. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was every 2 weeks we had alternating guests, and Cath was one of them. But we've now gone to a slightly more flexible approach, which is when we've got a few topics we want to talk about in one go, we bring it together. I would certainly invite you all to drop us an email if you've got any questions that you would like us to address in the future. They may not be necessarily pressing or urgent questions. If you have any of those, we can only recommend that you go and seek professional veterinary advice as soon as possible about your Scottie. But if there are more general questions that you want, maybe just things that are sort of nagging at the back of your mind, I need to ask about this, I don't know the answer to that, feel free to drop an email, info@londonscottie.club, and we will park your question for a future edition of Scottie MOT. Okay, well, on that note, I think really, I just want to say it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show, Cath. We look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to London Scottie Radio. This and all our podcasts are available online at londonscottie.club. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe to us from your favourite podcast player app. Also visit us on YouTube for fun videos. And if you have a Scottish Terrier in London or nearby, be sure to join us.